Hello, welcome to Quest 1, Module 5, Writing a Story. We're going to go ahead and get started by reviewing the pre-writing chart that you see on the screen. First, you need to be aware of the fact that there are elements that you consider when it's time to write a story. For example, the motif. What is the guiding idea that you want to include in your short story? Do you want to address a topic related to betrayal? Do you want to address a topic related to something humorous, such as embarrassment? What's the premise of your story? That's the question you need to ask yourself. Next, you want to consider theme. What lesson or message do you want to convey to your audience? Next is conflict. What will your character have to face? What is it that you would like to address with your protagonist that you would like him or her to overcome or to attempt to overcome? And what is your resolution? Will he or she resolve the issue at the end of the story, or will they just address it and you will leave your audience with the cliffhanger? Who will your characters be? It's important to think about limiting your characters so that you can do a better job with developing their complexity versus having a lot of characters. Usually the rule of thumb is not more than 3 characters when you're writing a short story. One character that the plot is centered around and 1 or 2 characters that help to advance that plot. So who are your characters going to be? How will they relay the theme or the message that you want to convey to your audience? And then you want to consider next mood and tone. How is it that you'd like your audience to feel? How are you going to make them feel that way? What words or ideas or images will you include that will help them to feel a certain way? And then tone. If it's important for your audience to know what you feel, how are you going to convey that? If the topic that you choose to write about is revenge, and you feel that it's wrong for a character to take revenge, then how are you going to convey that through the story's details? What is the tone going to be? How are you going to appeal to your audience and get them to side with you about how you feel? Then we have the beginning of the story. We know that in the beginning of a story, we have the exposition, which includes an introduction to the characters, any background information that's important, also the setting, and then we have the rising action, or what leads to the major conflict. So how do you want your story to start? What are you going to say about the characters? What information is important for your audience to know related to those characters' background? And then where does your story take place? It's important to consider those things before you get started. Okay, and then you'll want to consider the middle of your story. What is the climax of your story? Where will your character venture into where he or she cannot return to his or her experiences before? What is your climax going to be? And then finally, the end of your story. Will your story have an end, or will it end after the climax as a cliffhanger? If your story has an end, how do you want the situation to be resolved? Okay. So now that we've had the opportunity to look at the pre-planning chart, I'm going to go through and list some ideas and talk you through how to plan for your story. If you'll notice in Schoology, there are 2 folders. One is SDI and one is enrichment, and I'll refer you to those folders for resources as needed. Let's go ahead and take a look at the first box, the motif box. What is the premise of my story? What would I want my story to be about? Okay, I am going to model my story slightly after Telltale Heart by Edgar Allan Poe. That is one of the resources you have as a mentor text in your SDI folder. I really like the way the main character perceived a situation to be one way, but in reality it wasn't. If you'll notice, he thought the older man was dangerous to him somehow because of the way his eye looked. So I'm deciding that my motif is going to be the exact same as the motif in Telltale Heart, perception versus reality. Now I'm going to take a look at the theme, the lesson or the message that I would like to convey to my audience. Okay, so in terms of the theme that I would like to convey to the audience, I would like for them to know that outward appearances are not always what they seem, or they are sometimes deceptive. So that is the theme that I'll use for my short story. Okay, let's take a look at the box for conflict and resolution. What is the major problem I would like for my character or characters to struggle with, and then how would I want it to be resolved? So I've decided that the primary conflict that my character will face is feeling like an outsider. The resolution, because I've decided to include one, will include a popular girl who discovers my main character's value in terms of his sense of humor and invites him to join her social circle. So he is no longer going to feel like an outsider at the end. Alrighty, let's take a look at complex characters. Who will they be? Who are they? My two complex characters are Anthony and Isabella. They will both be non-stereotypical in that I will include details that characterize Anthony as a quiet but funny person, also wise, and Isabella as a person who is beautiful on the inside despite being judged as shallow. So those are going to be my two characters that I will create to be non-stereotypical and somewhat complex. Now let's move on to the mood. What mood will I create? What tone do I want to convey to my audience regarding outward appearances and how people are judged based on how they seem versus who they really are? Okay, with the mood, it will actually change from the beginning to the middle to the end. In the beginning, I'd like the audience to feel somewhat sad and sympathetic toward Anthony's current situation. Next, I would want the audience to feel a little bit anxious and upset by the way the popular kids or Anthony's peers tend to disregard him as if he is invisible. And toward the end, I want them to feel happy and inspired by the way Isabella includes Anthony in, his newfound confidence and his happiness at being accepted into the social circle at his school. So in terms of tone, I will convey a critical tone in the beginning when Anthony is upset and feeling alone and alienated, like he's not a part of what's happening in terms of the social atmosphere at his school. And then I want the tone to be somewhat approving, or to be actually very approving toward the end when Isabella includes Anthony in her social circle. So I would like to convey two different tones there. Okay, now it's time to think about the beginning of the story. How would I want my story to start? I could start with the characters waking up in the morning and having breakfast, but usually you would want to start your story with a relevant point or something that matters in terms of the advancing of the plot. So I'm going to think about that for a moment. Alrighty, let's take a look at the beginning of my story. What would I like to try in terms of the beginning? Well, I'd like the story to take place in a cafeteria because that's a place where people, students particularly, tend to gather and discuss things and talk about things. And so that will be my chance to introduce Anthony and create a situation where he is rejected and he is ignored. So I'd like the story to definitely take place there, and it will set up the opportunity for Anthony to later be embraced by Isabella. So this is giving the important background information we need. It's also giving me as an author the opportunity to characterize both Anthony and Isabella. So we're going to get some background information about both Anthony and Isabella that will help the reader to feel more connected to both characters and understand Anthony a whole lot more. Alrighty, now let's take a look at the middle of the story. What is it that we want to happen next? What exactly would we want to happen in our climax? The middle of the story is where my climax will be presented. And the climax of the story is a situation where Anthony seeks to join the popular crowd in student council, and he is rejected, but Isabella stands up for him and requests another vote. At the end of the middle of the section, the students will vote. So what I need to consider is, how would I want my story to end? What is the resolution, of course, which I've thought of before? He will be invited to join the circle, so I know that it's going to end on a good note, but what specifically do I want to happen? So I'm going to think about how I want my story to end. Specifically for the ending, I want to make sure that the votes are unanimous and Anthony does feel indeed accepted by the popular students who are in student council. And additionally, I would like for him to feel not only included in his social circle, his new social circle, I would like for him to feel accepted in a romantic way. So I've decided to include the detail that Isabella invites him on a date. So he's received the ultimate acceptance from his peers. So that is how I would plan my story. After I finish planning my story using the chart, I would then take the information that I have and use it almost like a map to create the draft of my story. And that is what you'll do next. If you need any information, you can look in the SDI chart to help you find information related to creating characters, generating a well-developed conflict, and generating a well-developed resolution. Additionally, in the SDI folder, you'll find Telltale Heart, which you can use as a mentor text and identify how the characters were created by Poe, how he revealed his conflict, how his story was resolved, and etc. If you look into the enrichment folder, you will find a handout that will assist you with creating suspense through use of sensory details. And you will also find a handout that helps you to create dialogue that's relevant to your story. So not the generic, hi, my name is Anthony, hi, my name is Isabella, but actual dialogue that moves the plot along. Thank you for taking Quest 2, Module 1.